type 1 diabetes. Don't take Rybelsus if you or your family ever had medullary thyroid cancer, or have multiple endocrine neoplasia syndrome type 2, or if allergic to it. Stop Rybelsus and get medical help right away if you get a lump or swelling in your neck, severe stomach pain, or an allergic reaction. Serious side effects may include pancreatitis. Tell your provider about vision problems or changes. Taking Rybelsus with a sulfonylurea or insulin increases low blood sugar risk. Side effects like nausea,
Hi everyone, Tim Ard here. Welcome to Thursday Night Saws along the Forest Apps Road. We're in Columbia, South Carolina. Going to be doing a thing with electric statewide tomorrow, and so we just pulled in here a little while ago. We've had a great week so far. We've been over working in Clemson, at Seneca, at the South Carolina LTAP office. And then we've moved from there down to Eastover, and we've had a hands-on program there with some South Carolina DOT folks. And it finished up today working on some pretty dead pine trees that needed to come down around the shooting range facilities. So we've had a great week. The weather's been super. The participants have been great, and so we've really enjoyed the week so far. Looking forward to tomorrow with some linemen and right-of-way folks. So anyway, we're here outside of Clemson. I guess it's actually not Clemson, but West Columbia, and I wanted to kind of go through a couple things here. And first is looking at what we have coming up. Next week we're going to be down in Florida. We'll start off the week, I think, Ocala, and then over to Weeki Wachee, that area over there, and with Southwest Florida Water Management. But next Saturday, I believe it's the 19th, we're going to be doing a program for Amsler's Saw Shop in Brooksville, Florida. And so we'll be starting, I think it's going to be held at Enon Baptist Church, just north of Brooksville, and the outside pavilion there, and then across the street we have a tree we can work with. And so we'll be starting that about 8 o'clock, I think, on Saturday morning, and then sometime about lunch we'll be finishing up. And I don't know whether they're bringing it out to the pavilion or whether we're going back to the shop. But they usually have a huge feed, so you're welcome to come and partake in the workshop, and then also hang around for lunch, and I think it'd be well worth your time. Always a good time there. Been doing those with them for several years, and they always go great. So looking forward to this year's. And then we have coming up on May the 10th, 11th, and 12th. We're going to be up in Asheville, North Carolina, and we've set up a storm sawing workshop, 3-day workshop, 10th, 11th, 12th of May, to work there on the Biltmore estate. And so they have a really great tree program as well as landscape, and so they've offered the opportunities to work there. Past few years, I guess about the past 12 years, we have offered this workshop at Berry College there in Rome. And so it's going to be a little bit farther north this time. We hope to get back to Berry one time too pretty soon. But we'll be there at the Biltmore coming up in May. So more details on our website at www.forestapps.com. You can check it out there and read through it, or send us a message at info@forestapps.com, and we'll try to get some more info to you on that. Right now we've still got some seats left, so they're starting to fill up though. So if you get your reservation in, and then money for the course, which it's $750 for the 3 days, and that covers the training as well as lunch each day. And then you're responsible for your lodging as well as any other meals throughout the 3 days. And we'll be covering all kinds of extensive stuff. A lot of hands-on time. As a matter of fact, the only workshop time will really be that morning, the first day. And then after that, everything else will be in the woods. So a lot of hands-on sharpening, checking out the saws, being able to work with different storm sawing situations, felling trees. Everyone will be felling a tree, as well as bucking and limbing. So it'll be quite a good workshop for you. And so we're looking forward to that in May. But tonight I wanted to kind of talk a little bit. This week has has kind of opened up. I've got a video that I'll be uploading probably Saturday that goes through a little bit of what we've had here on this site or the site we were at today in Eastover, and that's dealing with some really dead pine trees, pretty good diameters. One of them I got some really good video on. It was the whole stump was just beat all to pieces. A lot of lighter, hard as a rock in the bottom of it, and the tree we ended up having to let it go backwards, but you can kind of see how the fiber was in that tree. So some things to look for when you're dealing with dead pine trees. But we felt, I guess, probably about 8 or 9 of them, and all of them went great except for that one. But you can kind of see how the difference in the beetle kills. All of them were beetle kills, and a couple damages. 2 of them were damaged, and then the rest of them beetle killed. And it was quite interesting to see how the hinges worked. The folks did a great job today. I mean, they really paid close attention. They kept their hinges there, and even on the large one went backwards. I ended up having to take the hinge off of it, just let it go back, simply because he had everything set up perfect on it, but the back of the tree, which you couldn't really tell with all the lighter hardening happening, that it just collapsed. There was a soft spot under it, but we were able to get it down safely, and that's the important thing. So I was real pleased to see that happening. But anyhow, that's going to be probably airing on Saturday, and I think you'll find it quite interesting from this week's Along the Forest Apps Road. But I wanted to kind of discuss just a little bit of the planning process that I went through with them, and there's not a whole lot of difference when you're taking information, as far as a dead tree and one that's got good fiber. But a standing dead tree, you have to make sure that you have solid enough base on it, especially in the hinge area. But you have to really look for any kind of fiber that won't support weight, and I think that's the biggest thing to have to consider between a tree that's kind of eroding and one that has pretty decent fiber. But the planning process that we always start off with, and if we think about it, it's the same 5 steps that we look at. First of all, you have to really look to see that you have a spot long enough and wide enough to place the tree. And this is so important with a dead or dying tree, because the top is generally more brittle than will come apart than a green canopy. And so anything that top of that tree will hit, passing another limb, another canopy, twisting, all of that tends to start to break limbs, fold back tops, that kind of thing. And so we have to really make sure we have a spot that's wide enough and long enough to place that tree. So important that we check a height measure. If you've never used triangulation, a hypsometer is a technical term for the machine that you would use for it, but basically like a Biltmore stick, or you can just take a stick off the ground that's as long as your arm and be able to figure out the height of that tree. And so what you want to do is you want to back up and check to make sure that tree top isn't going to hit in another canopy or in another tree, or on the ground in a situation that you can't complete the work on it. So it's so important that we check the height on the tree. So that gives us the length that we need in that as they say, the lay or the drop zone of the tree, and then also have the width there. And so many times if you don't have a bucket with enough lift, or you don't have something to climb and swing off of, then dropping these trees is your only alternative, other than, I always tell people, dynamite and det cord. But the tops are really volatile. They tend to break, at some portion of the tree where the bark has come off, has been wet, or the beetles have really worked on it hard. So you have to really look for any kind of blemishes, cat faces up the tree. But the main thing is you don't want any resistance in the fall. And so I've got a couple things kind of drawn here that if we take a look at this, one thing is wind. You definitely don't want to be working with dead trees if there's any wind that's substantial at all. If it's blowing the right direction, but if there's any circling wind, it's best to leave them alone, because you really don't know what that base is going to do, and you don't know what the top is going to do. So even watching it as close as you can or whatever, it's not a very good idea. So dead trees definitely want to be calm day work. And then next thing is what I call post office things. In other words, could be rain, sleet, snow, those kinds of things that may make your work area a little bit treacherous. You want to make sure that you have good footing, that you're not going to be slipping and sliding around. You want to make sure that you've got your area that's not too slippery, so that you can do it. And then also to be able to clean around that tree to make sure that you've got a building, we'll get to it in a minute, with escape route, but you've got to make sure that your footing is stable in that area. And then one thing for sure, and it happens a lot with a lot of the dead trees, is the you start thinking about vines, and vines cause a lot of struck bys. That's one of the biggest things that creates the injuries when felling trees. It's been number one for many years, and that's struck by situations. Something comes out of the tree and hits you, a limb or a tree the wrong way, that type of thing. So you want to make sure that you really look closely for vines that can start to turn or twist or pull limbs and things out on you. And then next thing that we want to look for is what they call widowmakers, and that might be limbs that are hanging in the top. It could be that the whole top, as we talked about, the canopy of the tree, even though it may be reduced with limbs falling out, you want to make sure that you don't work under something that could be hanging, that as soon as I call it the attitude of the tree changes, that it doesn't drop something on the operator. So we're looking for tops that are very unstable or hanging limbs that can come down. Also in the work area around, there could be snags, and so in that situation we have to go out and check them. In other words, some of them you can go out there and push them over with one finger, and then sometimes they're pretty stable. We at least want to make sure that they're not weak at the root system, and that they are kind of leaning away from us, so that we don't end up shaking something and falling, especially if a limb is going to brush it or whatever. As you start to work on the tree, it can loosen it up and cause it to fall towards you. So have to be very cautious on that. And then in the tree itself, as I said, we have to look in limb structures and things that might be a little bit weakened in that case. And so we want to make sure, looking at crotches, limb crotches, and areas that that could tend to split off or twist as we start to drop it. And then cat faces or hollows. And the trees that we did today, you'll see in the videos if you watch once I get it posted, just about every one of the trees along this trail road that went back in is one of their service roads back around to the back side of the range. And beetles had gotten in along there. They're fairly close to a pretty busy highway, so a lot of pine beetles had gotten into this area of the trees, and a lot of them too, as they work up and down that road, there's been damage to the base of the trees. And so there's cat faces or places that have been skinned and then they've tried to heal themselves. And sometimes that's the strongest fiber that you can get, and then other times it's very, very weak. Like in 3 of the trees that we had, the cat faces had healed, but it had formed, if you understand lighter, that's basically fire starter. If you were to buy at Pine fire starters, it's sap that has more or less fermented, and it can get hard as a rock. It doesn't bend very well. It's very flammable, and but it doesn't bend very well. It just kind of goes to a point and just snaps. But it's also very hard to cut with the chain, because it tends to have a ability to pick up a lot of sand and stuff like that in it, especially in this area, and so it really dulls your chain very fast also. And then the other part would be a root system, making sure that the roots are stable, that you have nothing that's actually rotted out or eroded around, to where as that tree starts to move, that you're going to end up with the root system pulling out or breaking. So we examined that root area, and especially we had one small really dead oak tree that we worked with today, and the root system on it had dried out so much, but on the backside of it you saw mushrooms, and so that means that there has been some moisture coming down underneath the bark, and mushrooms were starting to grow there, and so that means there's weak spots in the fiber. So it's very important to identify those. And then you also, in trees that have died, a lot of times you'll see, according to when they have died, you'll see a lot of times bird activity, because they're looking for the beetles, they're looking for different ants and all kinds of things, different types of food for them, and so a lot of bird activity in those. And one thing that you have to look out for are sometimes endangered or protected species. So that's so important to kind of be aware of different protected birds or animals that are in that area. So you have to change your plans a little bit should you get into those. You may have to call authorities and have them come out and move nests or animals. So it's important. I guess everybody has to have a place to live, but some of them can be pretty expensive for you in the operation, even on storm damage stuff. But when you start moving certain types of dead trees and things, you have bats, you have all kinds of different animals that may have to be relocated, or you may have different times of the year where you have to kind of hold off on that work. And then I guess a power line would be something then that could be a hazard as well as an obstacle. And you want to make sure that you have clearance of that. And if you're not electrically certified, then if there's something that you've got to work around very closely, you probably want to get in touch with the power company and have them come out and examine the situation and give you some ideas of what needs to be done to make sure that someone doesn't get electrified. So important. And it can get into some pretty high costs there too if you damage equipment. So you want to make sure on that. So also you have to kind of be aware not only of above ground but also underground wiring. So that's important too. Around a lot of times on park areas and things like that, there may be underground wiring that goes out to certain light facilities and those types of things. So and oftentimes the roots system on the trees go out to the drip lines, so you may have to really check or have somebody come out and use the proper equipment to locate those lines so nothing breaks the wires as you start to move these trees. And then the leans now. We figured out that we have some obstacles. We've got a house, we've got power line. We don't want to hit those. We can check the height to make sure we have clearance. But I guess the next thing is, if we were going to drop this tree, we want to try to go out into the opening. And so X would mark our spot, the direction that we we want it to go. And so to check lean on the tree, we want to put ourselves in two positions. And you know, with a pine tree that's dying, or even last week I had a maple where as it starts to die, the limbs come off of it on certain sides or positions. And sometimes you'll look at these pine trees and it'll just be a pole, and maybe even the top has already fallen off of it. So to be able to check leans, you may be working with just the center of that pole. But any limbs that you have going horizontal is so important that you take that information, because those actually will balance, you know, that tree down to the base. And so what we do is, whatever limbs we have, we take the farthest side of the canopy. Now this is standing in our drop zone, or in the lay of the tree, or behind it looking towards our target, I call it, area. And that would be to take, and you just kind of find the farthest limbs of the canopy that stick out on one side and the farthest limbs on the other. You find the middle of that, and then basically you would plumb that down. And we probably got a little bit straight here, but basically I'll show it off to the side. And that being that when that plumb line drops to this side of the tree, that means you have side lean, weighted side lean towards the house. The trunk is going to be pretty straight, but you have weighted side lean towards the house. And that gives us a couple things. If we were to measure and say that offset's 5 feet or something, we may have to take and offset our more or less our steering of the tree using the line on the saw to be able to put that center of the crown in the location that we need it. So if it leans over 5 feet this way, then we would basically go over here 5 feet to be our sight spot, and then that would put the center of the crown on target. And then the second thing that it gives us is it definitely gives us a good side, bad side. And from that situation, this would be our good side over here. So that's the side away from the lean, okay? And that's the side you always want to finish up on. And with the dead and decaying trees especially, most of the time that away from leaning side is going to have less possible debris overhead, limbs that can come out at you, hangers, those kinds of things. And oftentimes that's the side that's going to be away from it growing towards another tree even. So it usually is the best side to work from. Now, if that tree is a larger diameter than you can work with your bar length on your saw, you may want to do some from your, I call it bad side, but the leaning side, and then no more really than halfway through the tree. You really don't want to go more than half, because the tree could start leaning there while you're cutting. But then you go to the good side and finish what you can't reach, or you just cut on the bad side what you can't reach from the good side, but you finish that cut on the good side of the tree. So that puts you a lot of times out of harm's way as far as debris falling, struck by situations. And if you did happen to have bad material, or you cut too much material out, then it's going to sit on your saw. And so you want to make sure that you think through that pretty well. You always want to be on the good side to release that tree. And then you have to come up, and maybe I'll put a little aerial photo up here. So here's our tree. Here's our X out here. So let's say that we've got more canopy over here on this right side. So our lean is this way. So our first that we check is this position. We're checking our side lean, and then the other one is at 90 degrees to that position. So we're going to put a notch in there and a hinge behind it. We'll get here to it in a minute. That when this tree starts to go over, it's going to steer itself to our target. So the side to side we've compensated for if there's any side lean of the canopy. And then we come up to 90 degrees and do the same thing. We take the farthest limbs of the canopy forward, farthest limbs to the back, find the middle of it. And in this case, we've got a back lean on the tree. It's falling back behind the trunk. And so, if we were to say, okay, we've got 3 foot of back lean. And so what do we need to do? Well, we're going to have to we're going to have to compensate for that somehow. So that's our lean information. So we've got 5 foot of side lean, we've got 3 foot of back lean. Side lean is probably on dead or decaying trees more critical than you have really with back lean in many cases, because the hinge, and that's thing we'll look at here in a minute. The hinge is very strong side to side. Forward to back, but it's very weak side to side. So it's like a hinge on a door. If you were going to take and pull a hinge off of a door jamb, if you just pull on a knob, you probably have a hard time doing it. But if you were to exceed reaching up there on that top corner of that door and pulling down hard enough, you can probably be able to break that hinge off there. And so that's the thing, is same thing with the tree. The length of the hinge supports the side weight, and then the thickness of the hinge stays attached during the fall. So if you've got a lot of side lean, you need as long a hinge as possible to control that. Next thing is our escape. And the escape on the tree generally goes to the good side. If we're going to be finishing up our release on the tree on the good side, then more or less we would go away on the good side. And your escape route really should try to go 45 degrees away from the direction of fall. So that's important to think through. Directly behind the tree is oftentimes where a breaking stem or something would come straight back. Also, butt rebound. If something comes off of the stump, it tends to, the center weight of that tree is going to try to seek the stump. And so you don't really want to go directly behind it. You also don't want to go to the side, because, you know, and sometimes terrain-wise there may be different issues, but more or less directly to the side. When that tree hits the ground, it's most likely going to flip a little bit side to side, and especially if it still has a pretty decent canopy on it, that's going to take and cause it to roll and move to the side. So you don't want to stand there waiting on that top to hit the ground. As soon as that tree starts to go, you move to your escape route 45 degrees back. And also, when you considered, it should, if you can, try to be 15 to 20 feet. Statistics, as far as struck by injuries in felling, they tend to happen in about a 15-foot circle around the stump. So, not to be a statistic, you want to try to get back as far as you can. And it may be that you can't get that far. You may have to go behind another tree or whatever, but you need to think about when things start to fall from the top, when things start to pass, another canopy and break out, they tend to send projectiles back down to that circle around the stump where you're working. So you really don't want to stay there. You want to get yourself out of that position as quickly as possible. And so that's the escape. And anytime that you have anybody else working with you out there, especially on these decaying trees, is you definitely want them on the good side and somewhere fairly close to that escape route that you want to do. I always tell people one of the best places is more or less parallel to your hinge out on the good side, because if that tree happens to go backwards, you just go the opposite direction. And so it's so important that you have your people, if there are any out there, observers or whatever, on that good side of the tree. And if they're really not in there helping, if they're not part of your spotting or something that you need, they should really be 2 tree lengths back. And that's really important when it comes to these dead and decaying trees, because when they do hit the ground, things start to throw off sometimes. So you want to make sure that they're back far enough. So that's escape and position to be in. And then number 4 is really the important part. I've kind of explained some of it already, but the hinge or holding wood across there. And what we do is we use, in most of our training, we use an open face type of a notch, which is basically 70 degrees or more, okay? And it could be 100, it could be 75 or whatever. But when you get less than 70, your chances of butt rebound are greater. Because picture this, that if you have a 45-degree notch on there, that this tree, when it gets to a 45-degree position, which is basically halfway back to the earth, that face notch is going to close. And when it does, that hinge has to let go. But also in this case, with a decaying or a dying tree, sometimes the top is brittle. When that face notch closes, it tends to take and more or less shake the top. And sometimes it can, if it happens with, especially less than 45, you can end up with a butt rebound or the top coming back very, very quickly. Even with what they call a stump shot. And that is, if you have less than a 70-degree face notch, it's a good idea to make sure that you have a stump shot. Stump shot is that your back cut would come in at a higher level than the back corner of the notch. So that little step would help to keep it kind of pinned from coming back. But I will say this, it doesn't do as good a job as a hinge does, so it can still roll out sideways or whatever. So if we take here and think about a little bit more opening on our cut, in other words 70 degrees, that's a bad drawing. 70 degrees would allow us to make sure that tree is going to go far enough forward so that is going to come all the way down almost to the ground before the hinge is completely severed off. So there's not as much shaking up in the top. You've got control past other objects, and that's so important when you're dealing with dead trees, because any shaking that takes place is going to possibly change your landing, or it's going to throw debris. It could fold back, all of that kind of thing. So the notch should always be 70 degrees or more. If you really think about it, for anything that's a face notch and a hinge that you're going to try to work with decaying tree, that's for sure. But that's the hinge material, and what we need to kind of consider on that. Let me see, go back to my other tree here I've marked all over, is about 10% of the diameter in width of the hinge, and 80% of the diameter in length of the hinge. So the 80% is the length of the hinge, or the back of your notch, and it's the length of the hinge across the tree. You want a minimum of 80%. We use percentages because all trees aren't shaped the same. So basically it doesn't make any difference what you call the notch or the back cut or whatever. That hinge is your friend. That's the part that you need to make sure is intact to hold the side weight, and then to stay intact during the fall of the tree. And so the 80 is a minimum because you need something long enough to support that side weight. The 10% is a maximum. And so if I had a 24-inch tree, that would be roughly 2.4, 2.5 inches. If I had 80% of that, if it were a 20-inch tree, that'd be 16 inches long. So whatever shape your tree is, whatever diameter, that changes to be able to take and try to keep that hinge bendable, but yet stay attached and long enough to support the side weight. So like if you think about